So you would have seen there, as part of that little introduction, we showed you a little bit of the BRICS logo as well. And it all ties in at the moment with our power issues. It's the big takeaway. Yes, there was the expansion of the other countries, 6 of them coming in to play January of next year. But we're talking BRICS currently. Now, of the BRICS, that acronym, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, it's China and South Africa we want to talk about. Of those, some Chinese gifts left behind: generators, power supply, vehicles, off-grid systems, all going to be funded by the Chinese, we understand. Over 500 public facilities will soon have uninterrupted power supply. It almost seems a little bit too good to be true, and if you've been doing this long enough, it normally means there's a lot more to discuss. Well, let's find out if this is enough to help our country deal with this energy crisis. It is none other than Vally Padayachee, power and energy expert and former executive manager and former senior executive at City Power Johannesburg. Vally, good to have you on ENCA. Thanks for coming in. You got lots of notes, which worries me a little bit. What have you been noting down? What are we thinking about what I think is South African light at the end of a Chinese tunnel?
Good morning, Garrett, and a very good morning to viewers as well. And thank you for inviting me on a very, very important subject. Yes, I've been taking notes because the subject matter is quite important strategically to the country. But I think in the interest of time, let me get to some very important takeaways from this pact or deal or this donation.
The donation, I was going to say, which word are we using now?
Right, so I don't have all the details. I'm not party to that, so I can't tell you whether it's a donation, pact, and so on. So let's make the assumption and go by what the media is reporting. I think depending on who you talk to, and I know you've talked to a lot of people thus far, stakeholders and so on, you're obviously getting different comments. You know, it's a Trojan horse, it's ideology-based, it's a trap, and the Chinese will be the only beneficiaries. It's a one-way traffic. Okay, I think in the absence of the information and so on, I can't comment on the merits and demerits of that. But like in any other deal, and the BRICS is a trade intervention, sort of collectively, there's no free lunch.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, I've given this much thought, and it does not only have to be no free lunch from the Chinese side. In other words, when I say free lunch, they've already put on the table that the tender system has to be amended, the B thing has to be looked at if you want the deal. I'm saying we have, and I'm coming from a different angle, as someone who's been in the sector for almost 40 years and knows the space very, very well, is that we have an ideal opportunity to leverage this pact or deal to make it, to make South Africa a top-notch beneficiary of this. Why do I say this? In the interest of time, we can also say to the Chinese, if you want to play in this lucrative contracts and projects and landscape, because it's a mammoth deal.
Right.
If I look at the 8 pacts that have been signed, it's a mammoth deal, right? On paper. I mean, the devil is in the detail. So if we can strategically play our cards well as South Africa, we can, it can be a win-win situation because they want to make money.
And we have the market for it.
Right, and the market, but we have, we're kind of between the rock and the art space because we are in a serious electricity crisis. We need to stop load shedding. The economy is getting battered. The public is not happy, etc., etc. So we have an opportunity to stop load shedding ASAP, right? Maybe not stop it completely, but we can reduce it. Yeah. And the Chinese are capable of doing it. And when I talk Chinese, I'm talking about even the other big partners, India, Brazil, and so on. But let's do the Chinese because they put their hand up quite first. So in terms of that, we could strategically, and we could treat this as a strategic sourcing contract of products and services. And we actually did that. When I was in City Power, we did this when we were turning around and restructuring City Power in the early 2000s. We went in for strategic sourcing contracts, and it worked. So in the interest of time, how can we push back to the Chinese and say, if you want to play in our space, this is our free lunch that we're wanting, right? And there's a couple of points that I make, and just just very quickly, there's a lot more. So in terms of funding and finance, we need to get clarity, is this a donation? In other words, if it's a donation, does it come at 0% interest? Is it a grant? Is it partially a grant or partially a loan? If it's a loan, we should say we want the loan at 2 to 3% interest rate, and including concessionary funding, and that must also come at rock bottom rates. Innovative out-of-balance sheet funding for all capital projects. The Chinese must also give us that opportunity. If it's project financed, then the IRR must also be at rock bottom rates. South of...
It's the what now? Must be rock bottom
rates?
rate?
IRR, the internal rate of return.
Oh, thank heavens you said that. I was like, I just got a BA degree. I can't keep up with you. Okay, there we go. Got you.
That should be south of 9%, right?
Okay.
Then, Gareth, this is a critical where we can gain advantage and take advantage. The procurement of critical and big-ticket items. As we know now with the Russian-Ukraine war, the Chinese-US tension, all of that, we are sitting in a queue for all the big-ticket items because this is the nature. I'm saying if the Chinese and other big partners want to come on board and play in our space, South Africa should be allowed to jump the procurement queue to access, acquire such equipment as storage batteries, transformers, switchgear, renewable equipment, include solar panels, wind turbines. We should jump the queue, right, because we have an immediate need. Letters of credits, LCs, right, should take effect when the relevant equipment is commissioned and operational and generating revenue. In other words, if they sell us the equipment and so on, they must not say to us, hey, in 3 months' time we want payment.
Right.
What we should negotiate, and we can do that, is to say once we've installed the equipment, it's operational and commissioning, and we're making money, then we'll pay you okay? That's the critical one, right? Importantly, job creation, localization, skills transfer.
That was the point I was making earlier. This is the fear of a lot of people that we're going overseas, not local.
But I'm saying we can strategically position this, and we can do this. South African service providers across the entire value chain, generation, transmission, distribution. The Chinese, and they've indicated, but not in detail, they should be setting up local manufacturing, right, and assembly and what we call system integration factories. Now, I've done this when in my PowerTech days, Ultron days. In other words, the equipment carcasses are done in China, but the final assembly and the integration of the equipment, like transformers, switchgear, batteries, should be done locally. So we create sort of localization.
So jobs, but also the upskilling of
exactly
locals.
All that. Then what we call the EPC contracts, when we putting up these big projects to these big solar plants, these wind plants, etc., must include significant South African local contractor involvement, and we've done that to a certain extent for bid windows 1, 2, 3, and so on. I'm not too, and I don't have the details, the relaxation of the BE requirements. I'm saying that should be more the exception than the rule. Because I take a leaf from the president when he says we should not waste a crisis. Right. In other words, crisis like this, we should take advantage so that we benefit South Africans all across all walks of life. So what I'm saying is that the BE requirement should be there because the Chinese and other big partners can still get their pound of flesh without relaxation of the BE requirements. And then, of course, significant skills transfer, training, and development. And the one more point, Gareth, which I think is important. In this entire deal that the Chinese and other big partners could bring to the table, there must be a social plan to develop communities adjacent to these project sites and so on. So we should have a strategic government-to-government social plan, right, where communities around these projects, communities around the manufacturing facilities, etc., play a significant role in this.
Because we know what happens if the communities, I mean, we can just cite the mining sector. If communities in the area aren't being taken into account, we know how badly that goes there. Vally, I want to ask you this, and I'm so glad you took those points down and you've given it, because there's so much here. You've got the funding, the financing, the loans, the critical items, the credits, the job creation, BEE partnerships, social plan. It's all there, and I think they're all very relevant. For South Africans watching this morning, they're going to want me to ask you, Vally, if all of this happens, everything you've given me, and all the money that's being invested, how long before we can get on top of this crisis? Last question, I think that's the key question for those who aren't experts like yourself.
Well, I can tell you, given the Chinese capability and the capability of the other BRIC partners, especially India and, say, Brazil, a quick answer, professional answer, it will solve the crisis a lot more earlier, I think significantly earlier. When I say solve the crisis, we may not get to zero load shedding, but we could probably get to comfortable levels of load shedding, if the word is
if there's such a thing as comfortable load shedding, yeah.
And because I see you talking about blackouts, well, I must correct that as a technocrat.
I knew you were going to pick me up on that, yes.
We haven't gone into blackout. South Africa, 100 years, we haven't gone into blackout.
That's semantics, though. But yes, I take your point.
But it's load shedding.
Sure.
So I'm comfortable. That's why I'm quite happy that strategically, if our government and the other stakeholders position ourselves and negotiate this pact, donation and so on, we could come up, and I'll say this very respectfully, on tops. In other words, the big partners, China included, can still get their share, but this could be like the Soccer World Cup. You know, we had massive infrastructure that was brought forward 10 years done earlier. I'm saying and maybe one more point, Gareth, I'm rushing out of time. Besides the Chinese and the big partners addressing the current electricity crisis, we could innovatively position ourselves in that contract that they also assist us to bring in infrastructure post the crisis, right? But at the same time, we take care of the economy, we ratchet up the employment. I mean, we've got 40% youth employment. I think the youth can play a significant role. But we've got to play our cards well. And we should treat this entire thing as a strategic sourcing of products and service, whether it comes from China, India, Brazil. That's critical.
And I understand, and there are all those hopefully positive spin-offs. I'm still waiting for a timeline. You're saying sooner rather than later. What's sooner in Vally's mind?
No, we can drive that, and I think in fairness I don't have but the NEARCOM structures where I'm involved with some of the work streams, we can put that on the table. So we could drive this pact as opposed to, and I say this with respect, as opposed to the Chinese and the other big partners driving that agenda. In other words, we drive the agenda as to how they play in this space. And we can do that strategically because...
a year, 2 years. Vally, come on, just give me, what do you think?
No, I think if from day one of all the contracts being signed...
Everything done and completed.
Done, I'm saying with at least year one, we could get to probably stage 2 of load shedding, right?
So it could be as immediate as that. I mean, that 1 year.
Yes, I'm saying around about 1 year because the emergency generation of power, which the Chinese are talking about, the hospitals and all of that, similar interventions could drive down that time period.
That's good news. It's about driving down the time period.
So
I just wanted to see what your time period. 1 year, we could see some improvement.
Exactly.
I think right now South Africans will take it. Vally, thank you for coming in. As you can see, he's done a lot of work on taking down the notes, and there's so much to pick up on there.